A very warm welcome to all those joining us for this special edition of Have We Got Planning News for You, the purpose of which is to inform and update you on recent developments on the thorny issue of nutrient neutrality. Joining us is James Stephen, Director of Cities at the HBF, who my fellow panellist Charlie Banner will be interviewing in just a moment, before opening up questions to my other esteemed fellow panellists, Paul Tucker, Chris Young and Sasha White. But first, I'm just going to do quickly a bit of scene setting. Slide 1, please, Rob. And I'd like to just say to all those listening, please go to our website where you will find these slides. But I think I just need to begin by reminding you all that in August 2020, Natural England dropped a bit of a clanger when they wrote to the Somerset authorities, effectively telling them that because of the existing unfavourable condition of the Somerset Levels and Moors Ramsar site, they had to stop issuing planning permissions without carrying out an appropriate assessment to ensure that there was no added phosphates as a result of additional residential development. And that appropriate assessment test, viewers will recall, stems from Regulation 63 of the 2017 Habitats, which itself stems from Article 6.3 of the Habitat Directive. Next slide, please, Rob. So I just want to mention that by way of background. Secondly, regular viewers will already be aware of the recent case, CG Fry, which tested whether that the advice of Natural England properly applied to the discharge of planning conditions following a Section 78 appeal that was dismissed. And you will know that the one and only Charlie Banner here acted on that case for the unsuccessful developer. We discussed this on our programme with Clive Betts, Series 10, Episode 5, and the case itself is to be found on our website. And on this, I have a slide, I've put some links, and again, you will find that on our website. And the point is that the upshot of that was that Article 6.3 still applies, notwithstanding, some of you might be thinking, the EU Withdrawal Act 2018. Next slide, please. So we've had a bit of a standoff, and lots of planning permissions have not been able to be developed. And the government has sought to move matters on. And Mr. Gove announced on the 29th of August that he had some reforms to unlock this thorny issue. And those reforms include some tabled amendments to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. And again, I've included on this slide various links, and we move on. We'll get to the crux, please, to next slide. This is the crux of what is proposed. New Regulation 85B and subsection 2, when making the decision, the competent authority must assume that nutrients in urban wastewater from proposed development, whether alone or in combination, will not adversely affect the relevant site. So in a nutshell, listeners, viewers, it is a new statutory assumption which is sought to be introduced in the Levelling Up Bill. That's not the whole story, though. Move on to the last slide, please, Rob, if you'd be so kind, because alongside this new proposal is a commitment for funding. And that commitment is to improve the current unsatisfactory state, unfavourable condition, to use the technical language, of various protected areas around the country, so as to ensure that whilst new development can come forward, so can improvements to ensure that the unfavourable condition is brought back into favourable conditions. So that's another part of the jigsaw puzzle, as is the other parts of the bill which are seeking to ensure that wastewater companies are better regulated, to make sure that they play their fuller part, shall we say, in making sure that anything that goes into rivers is cleaner than it has been currently. So that's a kind of bird's eye quick run through of where we are now. And I'm now going to hand over to Charlie. I hope that's a helpful update so that he can commence his interview with James.
Thanks very much indeed, Mary. And hello, viewers. Hello, James. Thank you for joining us. You were with us a few months ago to talk about the then situation in relation to neutrality, and here we are now. My first question for you, James, is does this go far enough? Does this do what the house building sector wanted? Or are there further risks? I mean, for example, it's been said by some that the legislation doesn't of itself preclude neutrality from being a material consideration under policy, even if it's no longer a legal matter. So are you happy on behalf of the house building industry with the changes? Do you think more is needed, whether by way of MPPF updates or otherwise?
Thank you for that, Charlie. Yes, the industry is very happy with what the government's proposed, and it isn't what we expected. I'd been subject to an awful lot of rumours and speculation in about a month beforehand leading up to this, and I didn't honestly think the government would go down this route because they'd told us on several occasions, at least going back 2.5 years ago, that they wouldn't legislate to remove this issue. Although we kind of thought that being very familiar with the scale of the issue and the impact on the industry and the difficulty of achieving mitigation, we thought that legislation would have to be considered at some point. So yes, Charlie, we're very happy with what's been proposed. Your question about whether this can still be done through policy is an interesting one. And actually, it's something that I've assumed can't be done because this will be a legal requirement. It will be in statute to say that local authorities must not make this a requirement of plan making or decision taking. So I had assumed that there wasn't the ability for local authorities to introduce it by policy on the sly. And I think that has been confirmed in the discussions that we have had with DLUHC. We'll see how that pans out. What does this mean for nutrient credits trading and existing obligations? Because there's certainly a number of developers, land promoters, etc., who've already signed up to potentially quite expensive commitments. Where do they stand? Yeah, this is a thorny subject, and I've been subject to a lot of discussions, over the last week with people who are concerned about that situation. My view on it is that those nature-based solutions, which is one form of mitigation, will still be in demand in order to achieve other government statutory objectives like biodiversity net gain. There'll still be a requirement for that. Similarly, local authorities are still under an obligation to achieve nutrient neutrality, albeit they can't require house builders to do that, and will come on, presumably, to discuss the government's other measures in a moment. So they will still be in the business of procuring solutions, and indeed the government expects the Natural England Nutrient Mitigation Scheme to expand and to be expedited in order to provide mitigation solutions for nutrient neutrality within the catchment areas affected. However, it does mean that the demand from house builders, should the legislation get royal assent, will probably diminish. And that could very well have an impact upon the value of credits that landowners, farmers have been devising. But I think you've got to recognise that local authorities, and it hasn't just been the HBF who's been pushing for legislative change here, local authorities have written to government through the district councils network saying that this issue has to be lifted because they, as local authorities, are spending far too much money and resource trying to find a way through this intractable situation. And local authorities have been quite worried themselves about the cost of commercial credits for mitigation. And, the cost of those can be quite high. It's about £6,500 to £9,000 per dwelling as a general rule. It can be much more expensive than that in certain catchments dealing with certain problems. And local authorities themselves were worried about the diversion of developer contributions away from the provision of affordable housing, which is a critical priority, as well as planning gain towards other public services.
Thanks. So it'll be very interesting to see what the immediate impact of the amendments are, if they're enacted in their current form, on local authorities' 5-year housing land supply. And potentially some authorities will be very happy because they'll suddenly get a huge shot in the arm.
Yeah, precisely so. And that was another one of the concerns raised by several local authorities, including Ashford Council, who had spent a great deal of money and effort devising a local plan, which involves some very difficult political decisions, sensitive political decisions. Our political representatives have to make a lot of compromises on things. And you spend a lot of money developing this plan and maturing this local plan for Natural England's intervention to suddenly scupper that, to make that obsolete and redundant. And I also think, Charlie, that was in the mind of government. I think they were looking at the potential for these Natural England interventions to be made on the back of the Dutch nitrogen judgment. Sorry, I'm near a very noisy road. The effect of that actually completely undermining the efficacy of our plan-led system. Because it wouldn't matter what plan you produced. If suddenly a habitatable species was deemed to be in a vulnerable condition, you could stop immediately house building or potentially other types of development. So I think that was a big risk, and that's why I think the government has made the correct decision to try and change this through legislation.
Dare I ask this? You said you were sort of pleasantly surprised. Has this affected how the house building sector sees government? It's not been the most brilliant relationship, dare I say, in the last year. Is this does this herald a step change in that relationship?
I think so, and let's be cautious here. That it's by no means a done deal that the amendments will come into effect. But it's true that we have had a fairly taut relationship with government over the last couple of years on various matters, some of which, probably have been brought upon the industry itself. I'm thinking about the leasehold issue. Others that I think the industry would argue has been a failure of government. I'm thinking about approved document B of the building regulations. That matter. The Justice Morbick's report on that is expected in the new year. I think that will be very interesting. But it has meant that we've had a very taut relationship with government, and we've not been able to perhaps so easily get our point of view across. However, we've had some very good conversations with Conservative Party MPs, Conservative Party ex-ministers. And yes, I think the industry is very grateful to the government for at least attempting this measure.
So maybe the herald of a reboot.
I would think so, Charlie. Yeah.
And of course, it's not just about, as Mary's indicated, it's not just about housing, because the package, of course, which has to be viewed as a whole, includes substantial mitigation in relation to water infrastructure and farming. Do you have any thoughts on that and how that package kind of how those aspects of the package sit alongside the housing elements?
Yeah, I think it's a very important element that's often overlooked by those people who perhaps regard the government as just ripping up environmental regulations. The government isn't. I think they're responding to something that we said, and I think probably you did, Charlie, and others, that because of the Dutch nitrogen judgment, we're in this situation now where it was no longer feasible for the government to take to embark upon mitigation measures that might take effect in the medium to longer term. That mitigation now had to be functional, operational, effective prior to the occupation of homes. And I think that was a really difficult situation. I think what the government is doing is I think it's rebalancing the legislation back to how I think it was intended to operate under the Habitats Directive and the Habitats regulations in this country, which is that you could allow a temporary adverse effect so long as you have measures in place that would address those adverse impacts in the medium to longer term. And I'm very indebted to Dr. Ashley Bowes, your colleague, Charlie, who wrote that very good article on CapEx about how this doesn't represent a ripping up of environmental regulations. And the government is very clear that it's not going to relax measures to improve the condition of our rivers and our sensitive wetland habitats. It's just the timing at which that mitigation is provided. So the government is going to double down on actions by water companies to improve the performance of the sewage network, coupled with tighter regulation over certain agricultural practices, which account for about 90% of the problem. House building probably accounts for less than 1% of the issue. There isn't a detailed study on this, but I've looked at various forecasts that probably put it at less than 1%. So it was always, stopping house building would never make an improvement to the condition of our rivers, but it would cause great social hardship, for those people in housing need. And so the government is looking for a range of measures, and it's also looking for contributions, voluntary contributions from house builders in the catchments affected to raise money to contribute to, we think it's going to be Natural England's nutrient mitigation scheme. I think the money is going to be made available to Natural England. And I am in the process at the moment, Charlie, of trying to discuss with members, or we're about to be, I'm having provisional discussions at the moment, discussing with members how we might raise the money that the government wants.
Thank you. And you mentioned Ashley Bowes' article on CapEx, and Rob will hopefully be able to add the...
Don't test me on it, Charlie.
Material. Now, Ashley's article, of course, was in response to the Office for Environmental Protection, who issued what purported to be formal advice less than 24 hours after the amendments were issued. The amendments themselves run into 26 pages, as Ashley notes, so that's less than 1 hour per page of reflection. But they issued their formal advice saying that they considered this was contrary to the ministerial statement under Section 20 of the Environment Act 2021, where ministers have to confirm if legislation amounts to a regression in the environmental protection conferred by law. And they felt so confident after 24 hours as to say that they thought it did. Ashley wrote an article that suggested it may be a little bit more balanced than they suggested. And of course, the RSPB issued their now well-known tweets that they rode back from. So not everybody's happy about this. A lot of people in the environmental lobby have expressed unhappiness about this.
Yes, indeed.
An observation, is there a way through whereby everybody may end up being able to achieve a degree of consensus on these matters, do you think?
Well, I hope you're not going to test me on Dr. Ashley Bowes' article because I'm not a lawyer and I couldn't possibly give you a legal opinion. But my understanding is that I think what the government is doing, or I think what it needs to do, is to get us back to a position which I tried to articulate previously, which is that you don't renege or loosen environmental protections. It's the manner in which you deliver those and whether you can deliver those on a longer time frame, and it doesn't become an immediate requirement that you have to do that prior to the occupation of homes, because that was never going to be feasible. And the mitigation solutions just weren't available, and it was going to be really costly because basically landowners who had the solutions, were able to ransom those at the price you needed to in order to unlock your liability. So I'm hoping we might get back to a more sensible position or a more pragmatic position where we recognise that we have to deliver against the three strands of what constitutes sustainable development, and we don't lose sight of the social aspect, which is why I entered the housebuilding industry, because I wanted to make housing more affordable and cheaper and available to everybody, not just those people who happen to be wealthy enough, then and can afford to live in a nice big house. So yeah, I'm hoping we might get back to a more sensible position on how we go about delivering those three goals as sustainable development.
Thanks, Richard. Well, I've got a few more questions, but before I launch into those and hand round to the others, I know Paul's got a question on a related theme, so I'm going to just pass over to Paul for that.
Hello, James. Firstly, apologies for a couple of things. it's a tradition in this show that I always speak at a time when I'm at a motorway service area. I am welcome to Wetherby. I'm going to have to drop off. Second, I'm going to have to drop off any second, which is why Charlie's drawn me up the order. And I'll have a word with Charlie later on because he's already stolen my thunder in terms of my question. It's one of the problems if you cross-examine after Charlie Banner's gone first. There's no questions left. So, James, my question really relates to the Ashley Bowes article in CapEx, which I commend to everyone. There's been a significant amount of surprisingly intemperate language in terms of the response to this. It's almost as if the development industry is perceived to have won, the environmental side of things has lost, whereas that's very much not the response of Theresa Coffey's very well considered letter, which I commend to anybody who's watching the show in response to the OEP letter. So my question is really a matter of management. How does one go about articulating that this is not a victory for one side or the other, this is a way forward in terms of solving a national issue? How does the HBF contribute to that?
Well, we have been trying to maintain very good, constructive working relationships with many of the environmental NGOs and the arm's length organisations, not least of which Natural England and the Environment Agency. And to be fair, I think Natural England themselves, came round to the view about the same time as government that the current approach wasn't working. And all credit to Natural England on that. To be honest about how slow nature-based solutions were taking to materialise, and it would probably be better and certainly more cost-effective and probably efficient for the government to back Natural England's own nutrient mitigation scheme, because that could probably be done more effectively and cheaper without channeling so much money away from the ability to deliver affordable housing. So I think it is incumbent on the HBF to try and continue to make the case that we're not rowing back. There is no intention for house builders to row back on our environmental obligations. Indeed, if anything, stopping the construction of these homes is preventing more energy efficient homes from being built. It will stop biodiversity net gain from being delivered when that becomes a statutory obligation in October. You'll get none of those benefits. Greater water efficiency in homes. So I think we're trying to say that actually this isn't constructive. The application of the Dutch nitrogen judgment in this country is actually having not only social consequences in terms of housing hardship, but it's actually stopping many other related environmental goals being delivered.
Thank you, James.
And thanks, Paul. We'll let you return to your motorway service area, and once you've gone, we'll speculate on what's happened to your list. So, sayonara.
Rooms by the hour behind me, Charlie. As usual.
James, before handing over to the others, I'm interested to know your take on the politics of it all. Where do the other parties stand? And in your judgment, how much confidence is there that the amendments will actually get through Parliament, in particular House of Lords, in substantially unamended form?
It is interesting, and I've been in conversation with Matthew Pennycook today, who I think is nervous about Labour seeming to support a bill which looks as if they are tearing up environmental commitments, and we've tried to explain to the Labour Party why we don't think that is the case, and we've just gone through all those arguments and how this is important to deliver other environmental objectives and maintaining housing delivery, which is something that Labour councils have asked for themselves. As I said before, this isn't only a request that's come from the house building sector. Many local authorities have also made this case. So I think the jury's out on how the Labour Party will respond to the bill. I think they are in the process of seeking if there's another alternative, such as the proposal that's being promoted by Greenshank, which you might want to discuss later. So I think they're looking to see if there's an alternative. But I think all those alternatives, as far as I understand, would equally require legislation to be passed regulations implemented. So I think the alternatives would still require many years to take effect. And in the meantime, we've got a problem of 145,000 homes delayed by our calculations. The government's 100,000 figure, I think, is based upon those that are currently in the planning system. Our figure of 145 includes those that are allocated in local plans. So I think that explains the difference if people are interested in that. So I think the jury's out on the Labour Party. I think the position of the Lib Dems and the Greens is very clear. I think, they're implacably opposed to what the government intends to do.
Last one from me before I hand over to the others. Should we just spend a moment looking at what's not changed? Because the issues, not least in the CG5, which is obviously going to appeal shortly, the issues about habitats matters holding up already consented development in a situation where ordinarily that development wouldn't have to have another look at issues that should be looked at outline stage or full permission stage. Even if these amendments are passed, they wouldn't affect, would they, water neutrality or the Chiltern Beachwood type recreational issues? So any thoughts from your point of view about whether more is needed in relation to other habitats areas which are also experiencing challenges?
Yeah. And that's quite explicit, isn't it, Charlie, for the legislation? It refers distinctly to nutrients, and the Chief Planner's letter makes it clear that water neutrality remains unaffected. The water neutrality issue is a very worrying one for the industry. I think if these amendments go through, then perhaps we can breathe a sigh of relief for nutrients. But I think it's likely that the water neutrality issue will rise. And I'm seeing it, we're seeing it all around the country. We're starting to see local authorities, water companies saying, we can't supply developments with water. So can you introduce a local plan policy that restricts development unless they can demonstrate that there is an issue of water scarcity? That's likely to grow. We're likely to see more water neutrality zones emerge, particularly in the East of England area. My hunch about that is that I think the government is hoping to address the water neutrality issue through the statutory water resources management programme process, which is a statutory process whereby water companies should identify that there is an adequate water supply to meet the needs of the plan-led system for the next 20 years. And if there isn't, then these are the measures they'll take to ensure that. And those statutory plans are signed off by the Environment Agency and countersigned by DEFRA and the Secretary of State. And it has been our contention that if that, down in the Sussex area, the West Sussex area, that if that isn't the case, and Natural England, the local authorities, and Southern Water can say no, there is an adequate water supply that's harming a particular species, then somebody is at fault. There is a breakdown in the regulatory system somewhere, and I think our contention is that it's the Environment Agency that has failed as the oversight body. It shouldn't have signed off that water resources management plan, or the Environment Agency was right in signing off that plan, and that actually they should weigh down on Southern Water to say, look, you've got mitigation, you've got alternatives. You can port water in so that you're not extracting water from this aquifer that's in contention down in the West Sussex area. And I'm hoping that that's what the government is looking to do. It's going to tighten up that regulatory procedure to stop Natural England and the water companies playing off against each other, really. Because that's the problem we've got at the moment, is that nobody is taking responsibility.
Yes.
The water companies say, well, it's Natural England. Natural England will say it's the local authority, and the local authority will say it's Natural England. And DEFRA and the Environment Agency won't have anything to do with it. So government has got to get a grip on this problem.
We live in an era of buck passing, it might be said, in all sorts of respects.
And in terms of recreational impact zones, I don't really know about that one. That is, there are more of them than you care to think, actually. They crop up all over the country. But we would hope that, well, that's a difficult one, because my understanding is that the absolute block on development in the Chiltern Beachwoods has been done on the basis of the Dutch nitrogen judgment, whereas where they cropped up elsewhere, Charlie, they were introduced prior to Dutch nitrogen. So I don't really know about that one. I think that could be a thorny issue.
Well, enough from me. I'm going to pass around to the others now. Sasha, for your questions.
Thank you, Charlie. You nicked one of the questions I was going to ask about whether this will become legislation, but James gave a very good answer on that. James, do you think there needs to be some kind of, I don't know whether legislation or policy comment also that affects allocations? Because also I've been aware that some policy teams in local authorities have veered away from sites which have these consequences. Do the government also need to clear the path for the purpose of development plans that are emerging as well?
Yeah. So, Sasha, just help me. Is this about where you allocate sites? Do you allocate them outside of the catchment area?
Exactly.
Well, I think local authorities that have been affected by the nutrient neutrality issue basically haven't done any plan making. Well, Canterbury's advancing a plan, but they're not proposing not to allocate in nutrient sensitive areas. I think they're looking at kind of packaged treatment plants as a way around that. But it certainly has been, but that's been a problem with the nutrient neutrality issue. It has stopped plan making. And certainly local authorities were very, as Charlie alluded to earlier, very worried about the adverse consequences for 5-year land supply. Local authorities saying that then increases applications outside of nutrient-sensitive areas. I'm not really sure that that's a major issue, but certainly it was an issue that local authorities had flagged. And Ashford Council, something like 90% of its housing allocations were now, couldn't move forward because they were within the catchment area. So I think that's another reason why I think this intervention by government was necessary. I don't know what they're going to, I don't know if you're going to come onto this, but there's the question about what will be in the revised national planning policy framework. I would have thought, Sasha, they would say very little about nutrients because it would be unlawful for local authorities to make policy or make decisions on the basis of nutrient neutrality. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being naive.
There was a moment yesterday where LinkedIn thought it had been issued with no changes other than onshore wind. But that proved not to be the case.
I've not had a chance to check. I certainly haven't been able to look at LinkedIn for the past couple of days. I've just been at the back meeting today.
There's a September 2023 framework published yesterday, which is the same as with a response due later. But the same as apart from some changes to onshore wind. Chris,
which the government managed to get wrong. The government said that they were amending the 2019 version, and I think they'd forgotten they'd issued a 2021.
Well, I forgot as well, Chris.
Not a model of competence, you might think. Yeah, James, fantastic news. I know you've been working on this really, really hard for a long time. We've had you on the show to talk about it. Amazing, just amazing. And you've been completely focused on this issue because of what's effect it's had on the house building industry. I have to say, my view has always been to look at the water companies. I'm sat here in Cheltenham. Severn Trent Water made profits last year of £500 million, and they've done that through not always investing. So your statistic, just 1% of this is caused by the house building industry, demonstrates how absolutely misguided the target was. The target was the water companies and potentially re-examining what we do with agriculture and how much phosphate we put onto land. So stop the building of houses was absolutely monstrous, frankly. And to be honest, I don't think you're right about Labour. I know you've spoken to Matthew today, but that is Her Majesty's opposition you were speaking to. They are there to hold the government to task and to look for the best possible solution. But nothing I've read or heard is suggesting that the Labour Party is looking to oppose this if this is the most appropriate fix. So you may just want to consider that. My point is, why has it taken so long? Mary talked at the start about Somerset, but it started long before that. I was advising a consortium of developers and architects, in fact, everybody in Herefordshire, back in 2020, in light of the position that Natural England adopted when they contacted Herefordshire Council in July 2019. That is 4 years ago, when they then encouraged and the council then imposed a moratorium on house building, affecting everybody, planners, affecting architects, affecting small and medium-sized builders, affecting everybody. So why has it taken this long to find a solution when the house building industry should never have been the target in the first place?
Well, I think probably two things. One, I think the first is that it was unclear within government where responsibility for this issue lay. And we were certainly passed between DEFRA and DLUHC. It was quite comical, really. You'd write to Rebecca Powell about it, and she says, nothing to do with me, it's housing. And conversely, DLUHC was saying, and that went on for about the first, when we picked it up, I started picking it up in early 2020, and that's what was happening. And it was still very difficult to engage with DEFRA on it. It's only really when Number 10 and Treasury started to engage with it early this year that we started to see any movement. So I think there was a reluctance in DEFRA and DLUHC to give this attention. I think the other factor was that I think there was an assumption within DEFRA and DLUHC based upon looking at the Solent catchment, where the Solent area did actually manage to bring forward and has done quite a few mitigation solutions, purchasing of farms, whether that's a good idea, taking so many farms out of production. And Simon Kennedy, who works with the British authorities, is very vocal about that. And, all credit to Simon and the work that they did, albeit they were dealing with nitrogen, which so it makes your mitigation options stretch much further. But I think the government looked at that, and as I've said before, I think they were lulled into a sense of security. They thought, well, the market would respond quickly. But the solar was not replicated elsewhere. There are a few commercial schemes out there, but they're not providing nearly enough credits. And the few schemes that are there, local authorities tend to want to husband those credits to prioritise SME developers. We've heard from a lot of medium-sized developers who say need 7 credits, but the local authority will only allow them for 2. So I think the government underestimated how serious this issue was.
I think it's no secret that the change in pace on this has been led by Number 10 and Rishi Sunak's team.
Yeah.
It's interesting about DEFRA, because DEFRA's it's a funny old department, isn't it? Because it covers EIA, habitats, farmers, and water companies. It might be thought that there's various conflicts within the ministerial brief, and that we might want to go back to a maths ministerial for fisheries, exploitation, farmers, etc., and then an environmental department separate. And that may perhaps be a bit more efficient than a department with an institutional conflict. Anyway, Mary, over to you. We started with you. We finished with you.
Yes. Well, no, I would like to, in my naive way, I would like to take the politics out of this and just remind ourselves that I think this is all about homes. That for the very people, James, that you got involved in this, and it strikes me that government needs to get this bill through, and that bill needs to deliver on all 3 elements. The bill can't just be seen to be delivering on the environmental element. It's got to deliver, hasn't it, on the water company regulation and some new farming practices, it seems to me. If it doesn't do that, it's not going to give the confidence to whether you're, whichever political party you come from, it's not going to give them the confidence to actually vote it through.
I think that's a very important point that perhaps we've neglected in this discussion. The other important component in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill is the statutory requirement on water companies to improve the waste treatment works, and that is critical. I mean, the government's plans will. The government hopes that this issue will go away by about 2030 because the condition of rivers will have improved by then. But if you don't get that element of the bill through, then you're not really going to be improving the condition of rivers. No,
it seems to me it's all or nothing. You've got to have all of it, and we really can't afford nothing. So that's more of an observation than a question. But I mean, again, just for viewers, should we be distinguishing between what's going on here in terms of England versus Wales? Because is this not a devolved matter?
Yes, it is. And I had to check on that today because somebody else asked me that question. And no, the legislation applies only to England. It is environmental matters are a devolved matter.
Yes.
So I spoke to Mark Harris, who's the HBF's Wales planning policy manager, and he is in discussion with the Welsh government about whether they might look at what's being done in England and whether they might copy that. But I think that's very, very unlikely. I think the Welsh government would rather look at expediting mitigation solutions, I think, rather than legislative change.
But of course, the infrastructure is a bit better in Wales, isn't it? Because I think in is it Wrexham they have phosphate stripping. It's not something I've come across anywhere else, and so I don't know whether the Welsh perhaps they've got a better water infrastructure in place in the first place.
There you go. Learn something new about nutrients every day. But yeah.
They have that, Charlie. You're absolutely right. They've got it, and it's allowing the 3,000 houses in the plan in Wrexham to go ahead, although the plan's not progressing, and they have it in Monmouth as well. So you're absolutely right. They've got the right equipment in the water treatment companies, in the Welsh water companies. It's as simple as that.
If I may, there's a moral there, isn't there? There's a moral there, and the moral is that we haven't got our regulation of the water companies right, and we could expand this conversation to other issues like drainage and flood risk, but let's not do that. I think I'll let you close your interview, Charlie, but I think we must. We
certainly should get back to that, and it may not be it may be enforcement of regulation. The regulation actually arguably is there. It's that they've been let off the hook. Last one from me, James. Where does this leave Natural England? They might be feeling a little bit bruised this week. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I've been quite impressed actually by the way that Natural England's responded to this. I think initially it was in. The view of Natural England is that they felt they could do no other. They were presented with this legal judgment emanating from the Court of Justice of the European Union, and they felt they were obliged to advise local authorities, remind them of what their statutory responsibilities were. I think there was also quite a large amount of frustration with Natural England that nobody in central government was listening to them about the damage to our river systems. And I think it's possible that they saw the Dutch nitrogen judgment as an opportunity to roll it out. Dutch nitrogen's interesting because, sorry, I'm going to digress a bit here, but it doesn't really seem to have been applied anywhere else in the European Union apart from the Netherlands, where it's causing huge political turmoil now. But I think the Poles basically just stuck two fingers up and said, we're not going to do it because, they're a major food producing country. It really affects those countries that have large agricultural sectors where you use a lot of kind of slurry. Sorry, a digression there. So, Natural England, I've kind of got a lot of respect for them. I think the way that they realise that actually this is really causing some great difficulties. They'd hoped that nature-based solutions would emerge. They didn't, and therefore they kind of say, look, we can't really run this much longer.
Thanks very much, Jay. Well, when I was a child, I was a little bit unwell with something a long time ago. I saw a doctor specialising in that field, and he said at the end of the consultation, I hope you never have to see me again, because that would be a good thing. I hope, James, you never have to come on the show again, because that would mean things are probably going quite well for you. I suspect you probably will do at some point. But in the meantime, thank you very much indeed for coming on the show. We're going to be back very soon with our regular episode, so please do watch this space. We've already got quite a few exciting guests lined up and are working on a few more too. So please do watch this space. Thank you for watching. Thanks, James. Great to see you, team. We'll see you all soon.